Alright guys, Dominic here for Kit Guru, and today we are back with our review of Nvidia's new RTX 3070 Ti. So alongside the Founders Edition itself, here we're also going to be taking a look at Inno3D's X3OC model, as well as MSI's beefy Supreme X. To quickly recap what exactly this new GPU is, it's essentially built on the same GA104 GPU as the original 3070, but this time it's a fully enabled die. So that means the 3070 Ti has an extra 2 SMs, meaning 256 more CUDA cores, and there's also 8 more Tensor cores and 8 more texture units. The key change though is with the memory. While we still have 8GB, it's now the faster GDDR6X instead of GDDR6, and this comes clocked at 19 gigabits a second. This change results in a memory bandwidth increase of around 36%, so that should definitely help performance for this new card. To find out exactly how much difference though we can expect between these two GPUs, we're going to dive straight into our benchmarking. To do this, we of course used our regular GPU test system provided to us by PC Specialist. This is built around the Intel i9-10900K overclocked to 5.1 GHz on all cores. That is paired with the ASUS ROG Maximus 12 Hero motherboard, and we also have 32GB of Corsair Vengeance DDR4 memory clocked at 3600 MHz. We're using the same set of comparison GPUs and test games as we did for our 3080 Ti review. The only thing to note is that for the 3070 Ti itself, Nvidia supplied us with the 466.61 driver. The only other thing to say is that for our benchmarks here, we are focusing on the 3070 Ti Founders Edition, but we will show differences in performance between all three 3070 Ti's we test later in this review, as well as taking a deep dive into thermals, acoustics and more. Kicking off the game benchmarks with Assassin's Creed Valhalla. This isn't the best of starts for the RTX 3070 Ti. At 1440p, it averages just shy of 72 FPS, making it barely 3% faster than the vanilla RTX 3070. That puts it well behind the RX 6800 as well, which is particularly strong in Valhalla, with a 12% margin between the two cards. As for 4K, here the 3070 Ti does catch up a bit with the RX 6800, but it's still 7% slower. The main thing, however, is we're still only looking at a 4% uplift versus the RTX 3070, so it's really not much of a difference at all in this game. As for Cyberpunk 2077, starting at 1440p, we can see that the RTX 3070 Ti averages 64 FPS, and that makes it 8% faster than the RTX 3070, which is actually one of the bigger differences between those two GPUs we will see today. Despite being an Nvidia sponsored title, the 3070 Ti is also 7% slower than the RX 6800. Up at 4K, the gap between the 3070 and 3070 Ti actually shrinks slightly, with a 7% difference between the two, although that is only 2 frames per second in the real world. The 3070 Ti is also 2 FPS behind the RX 6800, but realistically you are going to want something more powerful for 4K gaming in Cyberpunk 2077. Next up is Days Gone, the most recently released game of the 12 we are testing. At 1440p, the RTX 3070 Ti delivers its best result over the RX 6800 that we will see across all 12 games, as it proves 12% faster, averaging 109 FPS. The 3070 Ti is also 7% faster than the vanilla 3070, which still isn't a massive difference. That does change slightly at 4K though, where the 3070 Ti is now 8% faster than its non-Ti sibling, which works out as a difference of 5 FPS. Relative to the RX 6800, we're looking at a 15% performance boost for the RTX 3070 Ti, though do bear in mind this is a best case scenario for Nvidia. Moving on to F1 2020, the differences between the 3070 and the 3070 Ti are much more muted here. At 1440p for instance, the 3070 Ti is just 3% faster, averaging 162 FPS compared to 157 FPS for the RTX 3070, which isn't something I think you'd be able to notice when actually gaming. The RX 6800 does well in this title too, as we can see the 3070 Ti is actually 9% slower at 1440p. Stepping up to 4K though, sees the 3070 Ti pull further ahead of the RTX 3070, but it is still only a difference of 6% or 5 FPS, so really nothing to go crazy about. The 3070 Ti is also 10% slower than the RX 6800 at this resolution. Next up then, we will take a look at Red Dead Redemption 2, where the RTX 3070 Ti averaged 71 FPS at 1440p. This makes it 5% faster than its non-Ti sibling, which is a fairly middle-of-the-road result. Up against the RX 6800 though, Nvidia's GPU is 10% slower at this resolution, which works out to a difference of 8 FPS. Bumping up the resolution to 4K, here the 3070 Ti is still just 5% faster than the RTX 3070, though at this resolution that's only a difference of 3 FPS. Likewise, the 3070 Ti is 3 FPS behind the RX 6800, though that means the Nvidia GPU is 6% slower. Either way, there's not much in it. As for Total War Saga Troy, as it turns out, this is the game which shows the most benefit to the RTX 3070 Ti when compared against the RTX 3070. At 1440p for instance, the 3070 Ti comes in 9% faster than the 3070, while it's also got the beating of the RX 6800 in this title. Up at 4K however, the 3070 Ti delivers an extra 10% performance when compared to the 3070, which is the single biggest improvement we saw from across all of our testing. That also means the 3070 Ti is now 5% faster than the RX 6800 at this resolution. Finally, we close out our game testing with Watch Dogs Legion. This title sees little benefit to the RTX 3070 Ti over the 3070, as the new GPU is just 3% faster at 1440p, and that's barely a difference of 2 FPS. Likewise, the 3070 Ti is also 3% slower than the RX 6800 at this resolution. Stepping up to 4K however sees the 3070 Ti overtake the RX 6800, but only by the finest of margins, as the difference proved less than a single frame. Meanwhile, the 3070 Ti is also 5% faster than the vanilla 3070 here, which is less than a 3 FPS difference. So that is all of the 7 games I'm going to show in this video, but we did test 5 more. So just a reminder, if you want to see all of our benchmarks in your own time at 1080p, 1440p and 4K, check out the written review over on kitguru.net. Here though, we're going to dive into the 12 game average, and as a big picture overview, the RTX 3070 Ti comes in 6% faster on average when compared to the RTX 3070 at 1440p. As we have seen, there is a fair amount of variation there, as not all games benefit as much from the increased memory bandwidth offered by GDDR6X. The 3070 Ti is also 5% faster on average compared to the 2080 Ti, though it does come in 5% slower than the RX 6800. As for 4K, most games are playable at this resolution with the 3070 Ti, and here it is 7% faster on average up against the RTX 3070. Compared to the 2080 Ti, it is now 6% faster on average, while it's also just 3% behind the RX 6800 at this resolution. Using that data, we can also work out cost per frame. As a reminder, and like I say in all of my videos now, this is done with the launch MSRPs, which don't really mean a lot. However, we still feel it's worth including this data, just so you can get an idea of relative value if we were living in a normal world. Starting at 1440p then, the RTX 3070 Ti has a cost per frame of £5.25. Against the RTX 3070 and the RX 6800 for instance, it is 7% more expensive per frame, while it's actually only 4% cheaper per frame when compared to the RTX 3080. Those margins are pretty similar at 4K too, with the 3070 Ti proving 6% more expensive per frame than the RTX 3070, while it's within a single percent of the RTX 3080. Moving on though, we do also have the subject of ray tracing to cover. So starting with Cyberpunk 2077, Here the 3070 Ti is only able to deliver above 30 FPS when testing at 1080p with ray tracing set to ultra. There, it's still just 5% ahead of the RTX 3070, so overall scaling is very similar to what we saw with ray tracing turned off. DLSS is of course still on hand to offer a hefty boost to performance, increasing frame rates by 57% when using DLSS quality mode. We also look at Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition, and this game isn't quite so heavy as Cyberpunk, and at 1440p the 3070 Ti is capable of averaging 80 FPS with everything set to ultra, so that works out as a 7% performance boost compared to the RTX 3070. If you stick on DLSS quality mode as well, here we're looking at a 45% boost to the average frame rate. And then we come to Resident Evil Village, which is our last ray tracing test. As the ray tracing implementation in this game is fairly weak in my opinion, the RTX 3070 Ti is capable of averaging over 70 FPS at 4K. The actual scaling though is still what we'd expect, with the 3070 Ti proving 8% faster than the RTX 3070 in this game. Leaving behind gaming performance though, before we come on to look at the two other AIB cards we've tested, it's time to talk about power draw. Now, as you may have seen, we have recently revamped our entire GPU power testing methodology, so if you want to find out more details, do check out our recent video on that subject. Here though, we'll start with a breakdown of the 12 games we tested, showing power draw at 1440p. This shows that power draw is indeed fairly consistent across the board, with just Assassin's Creed Valhalla being a notable outlier. Across those 12 games though, power draw averaged 276.5 watts, and this is almost a 60 watt increase versus the RTX 3070. Considering we didn't see more than a 9% performance increase to go along with that increase in power, overall efficiency isn't looking so hot for the 3070 Ti. As for 4K as well, power draw does creep up slightly here, and we see a 12 game average of 285 watts. That's really not far off the power draw of both the RX 6800 XT and the 6900 XT, which are both significantly faster cards, so I definitely wouldn't say that power consumption was a strong point for this new 3070 Ti. As we'd expect, that has a clear knock-on effect when looking at performance per watt. Starting with the 1440p data, the 3070 Ti roots itself to the bottom of our chart, where it's level with the RTX 2080 Ti, producing 0.36 FPS per watt. Its high power draw coupled with fairly insignificant performance improvements mean that the RTX 3070 is actually 22% more efficient, while the RX 6800 offers 33% better performance per watt. We can also see more of the same at 4K, where the RTX 3070 Ti is again joint bottom for power efficiency out of the 11 cards we have tested. It's clearly beaten by the likes of the RTX 3070 and the RX 6800, which offer 19 and 24% better performance per watt respectively. We're going to park performance testing there though, and let's take a closer look at all three of the RTX 3070 Ti cards we have tested today. Starting with Nvidia's Founders Edition then, this is actually a new design and it looks something like the 3070 and the 3080 Founders cards had a baby. That's because it's in between those two in terms of its sizing, but it keeps the flow-through fan design from the 3080, with one fan underneath and one on top. Internally, however, there's no vapor chamber as there was for the 3080, and it's actually just using 4 heat pipes, just like the RTX 3070 model. We can also see that Nvidia is once more sticking to its guns and has kept the 12-pin power connector for this card. Next up, we come to the Inno3D X30C. This is a very minimalistic design as it's basically just a black rectangle. There's no colour or RGB lighting anywhere on this card, with a black brush metal shroud and a metal backplate as well. It's impressively just a dual slot thickness, and it features 3 90mm fans, each with 15 closely packed fan blades. We can also see power requirements are standard with 2 8-pin connectors. And then it is time for the big boy. This is MSI's Supreme X. This is an absolute monster of a card, weighing in at almost 1.8 kilograms, with its shroud made of a combination of metal and plastic. There's also a lovely two-tone brushed metal backplate, while it sports 3 100mm fans. It's also the only card on test with dual BIOS, though the power limit and clock speed is the same between the two, it only changes default fan speed. Finally, we can again also note two 8-pin power connectors. Starting our comparison of these three cards with a look at gaming performance. Across the board, all three of our RTX 3070 Ti cards performed very similarly. The MSI Supreme X is, as expected, the fastest of the three, but even then we're typically only talking gains of 3 to 4 FPS. In some instances, as with Total War Saga Troy, the differences are even smaller, with only 2% separating all three cards in that game. So it really does just go to show the benefits to a factory overclock card are certainly limited. The reason we are seeing such similar gaming performance is that, in all honesty, the real world clock speed differences are not that significant between all three GPUs tested. Both the Founders Edition and the Inno3D X3OC averaged around the 1890 MHz mark, while the Supreme X proved about 75 MHz faster. Incidentally, as the Supreme X's dual BIOS modes share the same power limit and rated clock speed, gaming performance is identical between the two. We do, however, see much more of a difference when looking at thermals. Starting with the Founders Edition, our card hits 77 degrees on the GPU, with the hotspot peaking 10 degrees hotter. That makes it 4 to 5 degrees warmer than the X3OC, while the Supreme X is cooler still. On that card, the gaming BIOS runs a more aggressive fan curve, so it kept the hotspot temperature down at just 74 degrees, while the silent BIOS saw the hotspot hit 81 degrees as a result of its slower fan speeds. As the new 3070 Ti is using GDDR6X, we can also take a look at memory temperatures. Here, the immediate good news is that Nvidia has done a much better job cooling the G6X on the 3070 Ti, as it peaked at just 82 degrees on our sample. Contrast that with the 3080 Ti, which saw the memory hit 96 degrees, and this is clearly a big improvement, so definitely thumbs up to Nvidia for that. Meanwhile, the Supreme X's silent BIOS saw the memory hit the same temperature as the Founders Edition, but switching to the gaming BIOS dropped that by 6 degrees. Interestingly, the X3OC actually did the best here, with a peak memory temperature of just 74°C. And then in terms of noise levels, none of our three cards actually proved that loud. The X3OC was the loudest, hitting 41 dBA with its fan spinning at 2070 RPM, but in all honesty it was barely audible over my case fans. The Founders Edition meanwhile clocked in 1 decibel quieter, with its fan spinning at 1880 RPM, while the Supreme X was the quietest card by a decent margin. I have to say the silent BIOS was particularly impressive, as it saw the fan spin at just 1300 RPM, proving effectively inaudible to my ear, so that is definitely a very impressive result. If we take noise levels out of the equation though, our noise normalised results show pretty much what we'd expect to see. The MSI Supreme X is clearly the best cooler of the three, keeping the GPU hotspot temperatures down at 72 degrees, and that's even when remembering it has the highest power limit of the three cards. Next comes the X3OC, which hit 84 degrees on the hotspot, and that proved 3 degrees cooler than the Founders Edition. Noise normalised memory temperatures also followed that same exact trend, with the Supreme X's memory hitting 72 degrees, which is 4 degrees and 10 degrees cooler than the X3OC and the Founders Edition, respectively. The last area to look at then is manual overclocking. Here, all three cards managed about an extra 1000 MHz on the memory, but the MSI Supreme X definitely did the best in terms of the GPU. That's because it was able to hold its frequency over 2100 MHz, which I have to say is very impressive for an RTX 30 series GPU, while the other two cards hovered around the 2020 MHz level. In practice, all of our GPUs saw performance increases by 5 to 7% depending on the game played. The MSI was slightly faster to begin with, remember, and so it still proved slightly faster when overclocked, but overall performance scaling from these three GPUs did prove very similar, and honestly that is exactly what we'd expect from an Ampere GPU. So then, that is really it for this 3070 Ti review. In all honesty, I have to say I was just a little bit disappointed by the performance results. Remember, the 3070 Ti proved at best 10% faster than the 3070, but at 1440p the difference on average proved to be 6%, and in some games it was as little as a 3% difference. That is despite a pretty significant 27% increase to power draw, which seems to have mostly gone towards powering the faster GDDR6X memory. When we factor that in, the 3070 Ti is a particularly inefficient GPU, with the 3070 Ti and the RX 6800 absolutely miles ahead in terms of performance per watt. Take that information along with the 13% increase to the MSRP of the RTX 3070, and it's pretty clear the 3070 Ti isn't one of Nvidia's strongest releases this generation. In fact, I would definitely put it as one of the weaker cards that they've launched, alongside the RTX 3060. I wouldn't say it's as bad as the 3080 Ti, but that's hardly a glowing recommendation. Still, I want to be clear and say it certainly isn't a terrible card, and at the end of the day you are still going to get very solid 1440p gaming performance from this GPU. If all things were equal though, and you could get GPUs for MSRP, I would definitely recommend the RTX 3070 instead, as it's both more efficient and offers better value. And you can also make a strong argument for the RX 6800, as that GPU is faster and also has double the VRAM, though you do also have to factor in the weaker ray tracing support and the as yet unproven Fidelity FX Super Resolution. As we know, however, MSRP is definitely a complete myth right now, so the only thing I would say is if you are looking at a 3070 Ti, I definitely wouldn't be paying much more than the going price for a 3070. Just before I close as well, I do want to give a final word on the two AIB cards I tested. Of those two, personally I'd probably go for the Inno3D X3OC, just because it's impressively compact and it's also likely to have a less significant price premium. Then again, the MSI Supreme X has the best cooler of the three cards we've tested so far, and it also overclocked the best. The main downside really is just going to be, we know being the MSI Supreme X, it is going to have a hefty price premium relative to the other 3070 Ti's. Anyway guys, that really is going to do it for my review, so if you liked it, toss me a thumbs up, and as always, please do leave me a comment down below, let me know your thoughts on this GPU, and will you be trying to buy one tomorrow? Why not come and chat with us in our Discord server as well, which is linked in the description, and there you can also find a link to our merch store. Lastly, you can also consider backing us on Patreon, where you can see some of our content early and get access to exclusive giveaways. Until then though guys, I'm Dominic for Kit Guru, and I'll see you in the next video.